No one in the galaxy remembered a time without fear. Fear was woven into every star chart, every trade route, every political decision. It lived in the silence between transmissions and in the way entire civilizations froze when unfamiliar ships appeared on their sensors. That fear had a single name, spoken softly and rarely: the Alpha aliens. They were not just another species among many. They were inevitability. When the Alpha Imperium expanded into a system, resistance was not expected. It was considered irrational. Entire worlds surrendered before the first shot was fired, knowing that survival depended on obedience. Those who resisted were not conquered. They were erased, reduced to scattered debris, and archived as non-compliant civilizations. The Alpha aliens did not rule through diplomacy. They ruled through precedent. Every destroyed species became a lesson for the next. Over thousands of cycles, their empire grew vast and unchallenged, stretching across regions of space no one else dared to claim. Their warships were colossal constructs of living metal, older than many stars, powered by technologies so advanced they appeared almost divine. Their weapons bent gravity, fractured space-time, and turned planets into warnings. Other species called them the Supremes. Some worshipped them as gods. Most simply accepted that the Alpha Imperium was eternal. And then there were humans. Humanity arrived late to the galaxy, so late that no one bothered to pay attention. By the time humans achieved faster-than-light travel, interstellar politics had already been decided. Ancient empires controlled the major corridors. Younger species survived by compliance. Neutral worlds existed only because they were strategically irrelevant. Humans were small, short-lived, physically unimpressive, and emotionally unpredictable. Galactic archives classified them as non-threatening. Humans traded quietly. They explored cautiously. They avoided conflict wherever possible. Their ships were functional but inelegant, their fleets small, their technology efficient but unremarkable by Alpha standards. To most of the galaxy, humanity was background noise, present but insignificant. The Alpha Imperium didn't even notice them. Humanity was grateful for that. For a while. Their first true introduction to galactic reality came at the Galactic Council, a massive station orbiting a dead star where hundreds of species sent representatives. Humans arrived with curiosity and optimism, believing that cooperation and mutual benefit were universal values. They were wrong, but they listened carefully. During their first council session, a senior delegate from an older species pulled the human ambassador aside. His voice was low, his expression grim. "There are rules here," he said. The human smiled politely. "We respect interstellar law." The delegate shook his head slowly. "Not those rules. The real ones." "What rules?" the human asked. "Never draw the attention of the Alpha aliens." The name alone changed the atmosphere. The human ambassador noticed how nearby delegates went quiet, how even hardened war species avoided eye contact. "They don't negotiate," the delegate continued. "They don't compromise. They decide whether you're useful or expendable." Entire civilizations disappeared because they believed they could reason with them. The human listened. He asked questions. He requested data. And when he returned to Earth, humanity began paying attention. They studied everything. Then, years later, the Alpha Imperium noticed humanity by accident. An Alpha mining fleet entered a remote star system marked as unclaimed. Their sensors detected organized signals, artificial structures, orbital stations, evidence of intelligent life. The commander barely reacted. Minor species were common. Insignificant ones even more so. A compliance order was transmitted. The message was cold, efficient, and absolute. This system now belongs to the Alpha Imperium. Submit, pay tribute, or be erased. On Earth, the message triggered chaos. Governments convened emergency sessions. Military analysts ran simulations that ended the same way every time, with humanity's destruction. The Galactic Council sent frantic warnings. Comply, they urged. Survive. No one has ever beaten them. For 3 days, humanity argued. Then Earth responded. The message was short, calm, almost polite. This system is sovereign human territory. We do not recognize Alpha authority. Leave immediately. Across the galaxy, silence followed. Many assumed it was a translation error. Others thought the humans were ignorant, unaware of what they had just done. A few realized the truth and felt something close to horror. Humanity had refused the Alpha Imperium. When the Alpha Commander received the response, he laughed. Not angrily, amused. "They don't understand," he said. "Prepare a demonstration." The Alpha fleet advanced into attack formation. Weapons capable of cracking moons powered up. Human ships appeared shortly afterward. Small, angular, unremarkable. Alpha sensors scanned them instantly. Primitive by Alpha standards. Weak armor. Conventional drives. The outcome seemed obvious. The Alpha fleet fired first. A weapon designed to annihilate planetary shields struck the lead human vessel. Observers across the galaxy expected the ship to vanish in a burst of plasma. It didn't. The human ship's shields flared violently, bent under the impact, and held. Confusion rippled across the Alpha bridge. They fired again. Still no destruction. Then the human ship fired back. There was no massive beam, no exotic energy surge. Just a brief flash. And one Alpha cruiser simply ceased to exist. No explosion. No debris. It vanished as if reality itself had been edited. Alpha sensors screamed errors. Physics models collapsed. The bridge fell silent. Moments later, a human transmission came through. "This is your final warning. Leave now." For the first time in recorded history, an Alpha commander hesitated. They fired again, this time with overwhelming force. Human ships moved, not faster but smarter. They predicted firing patterns, used debris and gravity wells, allowed Alpha weapons to strike decoys, then counterattack from blind angles. Another Alpha ship vanished. Then another. The Alpha fleet retreated. Not destroyed. Not annihilated. Retreated. The galaxy watched in disbelief. An Alpha fleet had withdrawn from a battle. Against humans. News spread rapidly. Some denied it. Others claimed the humans had stolen Alpha technology. But the data was undeniable. Humanity had not only resisted. They had won. The Alpha Imperium responded as it always did to humiliation. With extermination. Across Alpha space, armadas mobilized. Not to punish. Not to dominate. To erase. And in that moment, without realizing it, the Alpha aliens made the greatest mistake in their history. They assumed humans were prey. They had no idea they were facing something far more dangerous. The Alpha Imperium did not know how to forgive. Forgiveness was a concept for weaker species, for those who negotiated because they lacked the strength to enforce their will. The Alphas had ruled too long, destroyed too many civilizations, and crushed too much resistance to ever consider mercy an option. What humanity had done was not defiance. In Alpha logic, it was a flaw in reality itself. And flaws were erased. Deep within Alpha-controlled space, the Supreme Alpha Council assembled. The chamber was vast, carved from black, crystalline matter that pulsed faintly with ancient energy. The Alpha Lord stood in silence as battle data from the failed engagement replayed again and again. Human ships maneuvering unpredictably. Alpha weapons missing their targets. An Alpha cruiser vanishing without an explosion. The silence was heavy. "This should not be possible," one Alpha Lord growled. "Statistical anomaly," another hissed. "A coincidence." The Supreme Alpha, ancient beyond recorded history, watched without expression. When it finally spoke, the chamber vibrated. "There are no anomalies. Only threats we have not yet removed." The decision was immediate and absolute. Humanity would be erased. Not punished, not contained, erased so completely that no future species would even remember their name. Across Alpha territory, the extermination order spread like a living thing. Massive shipyards awakened. Fleets that had not moved in centuries powered up. Planet cracker vessels disengaged from their orbital anchors. Soldiers bred solely for planetary invasion were released from stasis. This was not a war declaration. This was a death sentence. When word reached the wider galaxy, panic followed. The Galactic Council descended into chaos. Delegates shouted, pleaded, and argued in desperation. Species that had lived under alpha dominance for millennia understood exactly what this meant. Humanity had crossed a line no one else ever dared to approach. They must surrender, one delegate cried. Force them to submit, another begged. If the alphas follow through, there will be nothing left of them. A few voices whispered a different fear. If the alphas are reacting like this, what did humans actually do? No one answered. On Earth, there was no panic, no mass hysteria, no desperate broadcasts, only movement. Deep beneath mountains, oceans, and cities, facilities activated that the public didn't know existed. Doors sealed centuries ago opened again. Fleets hidden in deep space powered up silently. Command structures long prepared for a worst-case scenario came fully online. Humanity had listened when the galaxy warned them, and then they had prepared. Humans understood something most species did not. Survival did not depend on being the strongest. It depended on being ready when strength failed. Every historical human conflict had reinforced the same lesson. Peace never lasted, and enemies were rarely honest. The Alpha Imperium had simply given humanity a face for that fear. As Alpha Armadas advanced toward human space, they expected resistance to collapse quickly. Fear was a universal language, and the Alphas spoke it fluently. But as they crossed into the outer reaches of human-controlled systems, they found nothing. No fleets, no warnings, no pleas, just empty space. This is submission, an Alpha commander declared confidently. They hide. The fleet moved deeper. Then space itself turned against them. Gravity shifted violently. Entire Alpha squadrons were crushed as localized singularities formed without warning. Ships folded inward, hulls collapsing as if squeezed by an invisible hand. Crews had no time to react. No alarms. No escape. They were simply gone. Alpha commanders shouted orders. Shields were raised. Weapons charged. But the attacks didn't come from ships or stations. They came from the environment itself. Space bent and twisted under human control, transforming empty void into a weapon. Human fleets emerged only after the first wave was already dying. They did not arrive in grand formations. They appeared scattered, almost disorganized. Smaller ships, modular designs, nothing resembling the monumental Alpha war vessels. And yet, they moved with terrifying coordination. Human weapons did not rely on brute force. Alpha shields were designed to absorb unimaginable energy levels, but human attacks targeted weaknesses the Alphas never believed mattered. Energy harmonics destabilized shields from within. Precision strikes disabled command nodes instead of destroying hulls. Alpha weapons fired beams capable of ripping continents apart. Humans let them hit decoys, then struck from angles Alpha targeting systems couldn't predict. For the first time, Alpha fleets experienced confusion. Human tactics made no sense to them. Ships retreated only to reappear elsewhere. Fleets fragmented deliberately, then reassembled with perfect timing. Human vessels sacrificed themselves without hesitation to expose Alpha vulnerabilities. To the Alphas, this behavior was irrational. To humans, it was experience. Humanity had lost wars before. They had lost cities, nations, even planets. They had learned how to fight while outmatched, how to adapt while bleeding, how to survive defeat long enough to turn it into victory. The Alpha Imperium had never truly lost anything. They had never needed to learn. That ignorance began to cost them dearly. As battles spread across multiple systems, Alpha supply lines failed. Communications collapsed. Fleets that relied on centralized command suddenly found themselves isolated. Human attacks didn't aim to win battles. They aimed to break the Alpha war machine itself. Entire Alpha task forces went silent. The Supreme Alpha watched reports flood in. Lost fleets. Unresponsive commanders. Human counterattacks inside Alpha territory. They are adapting too quickly, an advisor whispered. The Supreme Alpha finally understood what they were facing. Humans were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to end the threat permanently. Across the galaxy, other species watched in stunned silence. The untouchable rulers of half the known stars were bleeding. The gods of war were stumbling, and the species everyone had dismissed as weak was pushing forward without hesitation. Fear was changing hands, and the Alpha Imperium was no longer the one holding it. The galaxy realized the truth too late. This was no longer an Alpha offensive. It was a human advance. The moment Alpha fleets began disappearing inside their own territory, panic rippled through systems that had known only Alpha rule for generations. Worlds that had bowed for centuries suddenly found their skies empty. Alpha patrols vanished. Garrisons went silent. The constant oppressive presence that had defined life under Alpha Dominion simply stopped. At first, many thought it was a trap. The Alphas had always ruled through fear and deception. Withdrawal made no sense. But as days passed, then weeks, the evidence became impossible to ignore. Entire Alpha-controlled sectors had gone dark. Trade routes reopened without Alpha permission. Slave processing worlds fell quiet, their orbital defenses shattered from precise, surgical strikes. Humanity was not just defending itself. Humanity was dismantling an empire. Human fleets did not announce themselves. They did not broadcast threats or demands. They appeared suddenly at strategic points, shipyards, communication nexuses, energy harvesting systems, and destroyed them with ruthless efficiency. They didn't bombard cities indiscriminately. Instead, they severed power grids, disabled command structures, and neutralized military leadership in minutes. Then they moved on. The Alphas had never faced an enemy that refused to occupy territory. Human commanders understood something fundamental. Empires collapsed when their systems failed, not when their planets burned. Alpha logistics depended on rigid hierarchy and centralized control. Humans shattered both. Every destroyed relay meant Alpha fleets became blind. Every sabotage production world meant reinforcements never arrived. Every eliminated command node turned once-feared armadas into disorganized, terrified survivors. Captured Alpha officers, rare but invaluable, revealed horrifying truths. The Alpha Imperium had no concept of prolonged war. Their doctrine was simple: overwhelm, annihilate, move on. Resistance had never lasted long enough to force adaptation. Their soldiers were bred for obedience, not creativity. Their admirals followed doctrine carved into stone centuries ago. Humans studied that doctrine, then broke it apart piece by piece. Inside hidden command rooms aboard human flagships, strategists worked without rest. AI-assisted simulations ran millions of battle scenarios per hour. Every Alpha response was predicted, countered, and exploited. Where Alpha logic demanded domination, human logic embraced chaos. Human fleets began deliberately leaving escape routes. Alpha commanders, desperate and afraid, took them. Those routes led straight into kill zones. Entire Alpha armadas were lured into regions where space-time distortions made their weapons unstable. Human ships attacked from impossible vectors, using gravity wells, stealth fields, and weaponized physics that violated every Alpha assumption about combat. For the first time in Alpha history, their soldiers felt something they had never been engineered to experience: doubt. Reports of human tactics spread among Alpha ranks like a disease. Whispers passed between crews. Fleets hesitated. Commanders delayed engagements. And hesitation in war was fatal. Meanwhile, the rest of the galaxy watched with growing disbelief. Species that had lived under Alpha boots for thousands of years saw human ships pass through their systems without hostility. Some worlds were bypassed entirely. Others received encrypted messages, simple, direct, unmistakably human. Stay out of this fight. We are not your enemy. For many, it was the first time a military power had offered them a choice. Resistance movements ignited overnight. Sabotage crippled Alpha infrastructure from within. Information leaks flooded human intelligence networks. Old grudges, buried under centuries of fear, finally had a weapon to wield. Humanity had done the impossible. They had made the Alpha Imperium bleed publicly. The Supreme Alpha no longer remained silent. On the throne world of the Imperium, ancient alarms echoed through halls that had never known emergency. Advisors spoke in terrified tones. Strategic projections no longer showed victory, only survival probabilities shrinking by the hour. The humans do not seek tribute, one Alpha strategist admitted. They seek removal. The Supreme Alpha's response was cold, furious, and absolute. Total mobilization. Planet killer fleets were deployed. Weapons banned, even within Alpha law, were authorized. Entire star systems were marked expendable if it meant slowing the human advance. The Alphas would burn the galaxy before surrendering dominance. When the first Alpha extinction fleet arrived at a human-aligned system, they found something unexpected. Humans waiting, not hiding, not retreating, waiting. The battle that followed shattered every remaining illusion of Alpha superiority. Human fleets fought not defensively, but aggressively, charging headfirst into formations that should have obliterated them. Ships sacrificed themselves without hesitation to create openings. Fleets coordinated across light years, as if sharing a single mind. And when Alpha planet crackers fired, human countermeasures turned the weapons back on their own escorts. Alpha commanders screamed in disbelief as their ultimate tools destroyed Alpha ships instead of human worlds. This was not desperation. This was mastery. Humanity had studied war for as long as it had existed. They had fought each other, learned from every mistake, refined brutality into strategy. Where the Alphas saw war as enforcement, humans saw it as problem-solving. And they had decided the Alpha Imperium was a problem that would never stop unless it was erased. As Alpha losses mounted, something unprecedented occurred. Entire Alpha client species openly defected. Supply convoys refused orders. Defense platforms powered down. Slave armies laid down their weapons. The Imperium's vast structure, built entirely on fear, began collapsing inward. The Supreme Alpha finally understood the fatal flaw. Fear only worked while it was absolute. Humanity had broken that illusion. Now, fear belonged to the Alphas. Across the stars, humans pushed deeper, faster, and harder. They no longer waited for Alpha offensives. They hunted. They targeted Alpha home systems, ancestral worlds thought untouchable. Each victory sent a clear message to the galaxy. The age of Alpha rule was ending, and humanity was not asking permission. For the first time in recorded galactic history, Alpha space was no longer sacred. The Alpha Imperium had always treated its core worlds as untouchable. These systems were not merely political centers, they were symbols. Ancient suns orbited by colossal ring cities. Worlds sculpted over millennia into perfect expressions of Alpha dominance. Every planet was a monument to conquest. Every skyline a reminder that resistance was futile. Humanity shattered that myth in a single day. Human fleets did not rush blindly toward Alpha core space. They advanced with deliberate precision, dismantling the final defensive layers one by one. Border fortresses that once guarded the heart of the Imperium fell silently, their commanders realizing too late that their strategies were centuries outdated. When the first human strike group emerged near the Alpha ancestral system, panic erupted. Civilian traffic jammed hyperspace lanes. Automated defenses activated without coordination. Alpha military channels flooded with contradictory orders. For a species that had ruled through absolute control, chaos was a foreign and terrifying sensation. Human ships appeared closer than anyone believed possible. They did not open fire immediately. Instead, they broadcast a single message across all Alpha frequencies, short, clear, and impossible to misinterpret. This ends now. Alpha civilians watched in disbelief as their skies filled with unfamiliar silhouettes. These were not the massive, ornate warships they had grown up seeing in propaganda. Human vessels were angular, scarred, functional. Every hull bore marks of previous battles. These ships were not built to intimidate. They were built to endure. The first Alpha counterattack was overwhelming by any historical standard. Orbital defense arrays unleashed enough firepower to sterilize continents. Planetary shields flared brighter than suns. Alpha admirals expected human fleets to break apart instantly. They didn't. Human ships absorbed losses without slowing. When shields failed, they adapted. When formations were broken, they reformed mid-battle. Some ships pushed directly into Alpha fire, detonating themselves to create openings for others. Human pilots did not retreat when damaged. They pressed harder. To the Alphas watching from their cities, it looked like madness. To human commanders, it was calculated necessity. Within hours, Alpha orbital defenses collapsed. Communication satellites were disabled, not destroyed, leaving Alpha forces blind and confused. Human strike teams breached ring cities with surgical precision, targeting military control centers while deliberately avoiding civilian population hubs. That choice sent shockwaves through Alpha society. No one had ever spared them before. The Supreme Alpha felt the change before the reports confirmed it. Deep within the core throne world, ancient sensors detected human presence closer than ever recorded. The Supreme Alpha had ruled for thousands of cycles, witnessing the rise and extinction of countless species. It had never known fear, not truly. Now, fear crept in. Not fear of death, fear of irrelevance. The humans were not reacting emotionally. They were not lashing out blindly. They were dismantling the Imperium with cold logic. Every strike weakened Alpha authority. Every spared civilian undermined centuries of propaganda that claimed Alpha rule was necessary for galactic order. The Supreme Alpha ordered the activation of final measures. Starforge weapons powered up. Reality-tearing devices once banned, even by Alpha law, were unleashed. Entire systems were sacrificed in attempts to halt human advances. Alpha commanders begged for clarity, for direction, for reassurance. None came. The Supreme Alpha hesitated, and hesitation destroyed what little control remained. Human intelligence networks intercepted fragmented Alpha communications. The myth of Alpha unity shattered publicly. Other species listened as Alpha leaders argued, contradicted each other, and openly expressed fear. The galaxy heard God's panic. Human fleets pressed harder. They struck Alpha academies, ship-breeding facilities, and indoctrination worlds. Young Alpha soldiers, engineered for obedience, were confronted with human forces that treated them not as monsters, but as combatants bound by choice. Some surrendered. That single act terrified the Imperium more than any weapon. An Alpha who surrendered was an Alpha who doubted. Inside Alpha cities, riots erupted. Citizens demanded protection that never arrived. For the first time, Alpha civilians felt what conquered species had felt for ages. The sky no longer guaranteed safety. Human broadcasts reached deeper into Alpha space. We are not here to erase your species. We are here to erase your empire. That distinction mattered. As Alpha morale collapsed, human fleets reached the inner sanctum, the system that housed the Supreme Alpha itself. Defensive constructs older than human civilization activated in desperation. Stars flared artificially as weapons. Space fractured under unimaginable energy output. And still, humans advanced. The Supreme Alpha watched human ships pierce defenses believed invincible. It reviewed ancient records, searching desperately for precedent. There was none. Every empire the Alphas had destroyed had begged, surrendered, or broken quickly. Humanity did none of those things. Humanity adapted. Humanity learned. Humanity remembered every atrocity committed against others and treated the Alpha Imperium as the final lesson. For the first time, the Supreme Alpha questioned its own doctrine. Had domination created weakness? Had fear replaced intelligence? That realization was more devastating than any human weapon. When human strike forces finally reached orbit above the Alpha throne world, they did not fire. They waited. The message was unmistakable. Surrender, or be dismantled piece by piece. The galaxy held its breath. This was no longer just a war. It was judgment. The waiting was deliberate. Human fleets hung above the Alpha throne world like silent judgment, their engines idling, weapons cold but ready. For the first time in Alpha history, an enemy had reached the heart of the Imperium and chosen not to strike immediately. That pause cut deeper than any bombardment. It forced the Alphas to confront a truth they had never faced before. They were no longer in control. On the surface of the throne world, panic spread through cities carved from obsidian and crystal. Sirens wailed without rhythm. Transit lanes clogged with fleeing civilians who no longer believed the Imperium could protect them. Priests of Alpha supremacy shouted ancient doctrines into public squares, promising inevitable victory, but their voices shook, and the people heard it. Above them, human ships did not move. Inside the Alpha Command Sanctum, the Supreme Alpha stood before a council that barely resembled the one that had once ruled the galaxy. Seats were empty. Advisors spoke over one another. Tactical projections showed nothing but collapsing probabilities. Every simulation ended the same way. Defeat. Not eventual. Not conditional. Certain. There must be another option. One Alpha Lord hissed, his bioluminescent crest flickering erratically. We still possess weapons they cannot counter. The Supreme Alpha turned slowly, ancient eyes heavy with something dangerously close to doubt. Every weapon we possess, it said, was designed to enforce obedience, not to defeat an enemy who does not fear death. Silence followed. That was the Imperium's greatest failure. Alpha dominance had always relied on the assumption that fear was universal and permanent. Humanity had proven otherwise. They fought not because they believed they would survive, but because they refused to kneel. Desperation drove the final decision. The Supreme Alpha authorized the release of the last resistance protocol, an action never recorded, never discussed outside the highest authority. Entire regions of the throne world were sealed. Deep beneath the planet's mantle, ancient constructs awakened. Planetary defense systems fused into a single catastrophic weapon. If the throne world could not be saved, it would be weaponized. Human sensors detected the shift immediately. Energy readings spiked beyond anything previously recorded. The planet itself began to change, tectonic plates locking into artificial alignment, oceans receding as if pulled by an invisible force. Human commanders understood the signal. This was extinction-level resistance. The order went out across the human fleet, not shouted, not emotional, but calm. All units, execute final phase. Human ships moved for the first time since arriving in orbit. They did not scatter. They closed in. Alpha planetary weapons fired, ripping through space with enough force to destabilize moons. Human ships were lost, dozens, then hundreds, but the formation held. Human fleets advanced through hell itself, using the dying ships of their own as shields, cover, and pathways forward. To the Alphas watching from below, it was horrifying. The humans were not slowing. Human strike teams breached the planetary shield at multiple points, landing deep within Alpha megastructures. Urban combat erupted in cities that had never known war. Alpha soldiers fought with ferocity, driven by fear and indoctrination, but something had changed. They were no longer certain they were right. Human soldiers did not chant victory slogans. They did not taunt or threaten. They moved with grim purpose, clearing objectives, disabling systems, evacuating civilians when possible. Every Alpha soldier captured was given the same choice: stand down or continue and fall. Some chose to fight. Some didn't. Each surrender sent a crack through the Alpha belief system. Soldiers bred for obedience were choosing uncertainty over doctrine. Civilians watched human medics treat wounded Alpha children. Broadcasts leaked raw, unfiltered images of humans risking their lives for those they were supposedly erasing. The Supreme Alpha watched it all. This was not conquest. This was replacement. Humanity was not taking the throne. They were destroying the idea that a throne was necessary. As Alpha resistance collapsed sector by sector, the Supreme Alpha activated the final failsafe. The throne world began a controlled collapse, its core destabilizing into a star-level detonation that would annihilate everything in the system, human fleets included. If the Imperium could not rule, nothing would. Human sensors screamed warnings. Escape calculations flashed across command displays. Retreat was still possible for some. Humanity refused it. Instead, they did something the Supreme Alpha could not comprehend. They synchronized. Across the fleet, human vessels linked power grids, AI cores, and gravitational manipulators into a single distributed system. Thousands of ships, acting as one, redirected unimaginable energy toward the collapsing planet. They didn't try to stop the explosion. They contained it. Space twisted violently as artificial gravity fields wrapped around the Alpha throne world like a cage. The planet screamed, literally, as tectonic stress tore continents apart. But the detonation was forced inward instead of outward. The throne world did not explode. It collapsed, inward. The Alpha capital was reduced to a compressed stellar remnant, its destructive potential neutralized, its symbol erased without destroying the surrounding system. The message was unmistakable. Humanity could have ended everything. They chose not to. Inside the collapsing command sanctum, the Supreme Alpha felt the Imperium die, not in fire, but in silence. Communications went dark. Authority vanished. The Alpha Imperium no longer existed as a concept. The Supreme Alpha sank into stillness. For the first time in its ancient existence, it understood defeat not as destruction, but as irrelevance. Human strike teams reached the inner chamber moments later. Weapons raised, sensors locked. The Supreme Alpha looked at them, not with rage, not with hatred, but with something dangerously close to clarity. "You could end us," it said. "Why don't you?" The human commander answered without hesitation. "Because if we do, the galaxy learns the wrong lesson." The Supreme Alpha realized then what humanity truly represented. Not conquerors, not saviors. A warning. The Imperium had fallen not because it was weaker, but because it refused to change. Humanity left the chamber without ceremony. Behind them, the last ruler of the Alpha Imperium sat alone in the ruins of a dead idea. The war was over, but the consequences were just beginning. Silence followed the fall of the Alpha Imperium. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that spread after a storm so vast that no one knew what came next. For the first time in thousands of cycles, the galaxy woke up without the Alpha presence shaping every decision, every law, every fear. Hyperlanes once restricted opened freely. Trade routes long forbidden flickered back to life. Entire regions of space simply paused. No one had planned for this. Empires were easy to understand, even cruel ones. They imposed order, however brutal, and the galaxy adapted around them. But the sudden absence of the Alpha Imperium created a vacuum so massive that it threatened to tear the fragile balance of interstellar civilization apart. Worlds that had lived under Alpha rule for generations didn't celebrate at first. They waited. They had seen rebellions before. They had seen false hope crushed under returning fleets. Old instincts screamed that punishment was coming, but it didn't. Human fleets withdrew from most Alpha territory within days. They dismantled military infrastructure, deactivated doomsday weapons, and left behind nothing resembling occupation forces. No governors, no tribute collectors, no flags planted in conquered soil, just absence. The Galactic Council reconvened in emergency session, its chambers filled beyond capacity. Species that had never dared speak openly now shouted demands, fears, and accusations. Some called humanity reckless for destroying the only force that had kept the galaxy stable. Others hailed them as liberators. Many simply didn't trust them. Human representatives arrived late. They did not arrive with escorts or displays of power. Their delegation was small, unarmed, and unsettlingly calm. When they took the floor, the noise died almost instantly. "You broke the galaxy," one delegate accused. "You saved it," another countered. "You've doomed us all," a third whispered. The human speaker listened to every word without interruption. then replied simply, "No, we removed a threat. What comes next is your responsibility." That answer terrified more species than it reassured. They had expected demands. Control. A new empire. Humanity had the fleets, the technology, and now the reputation to rule unchallenged. Instead, they refused the throne entirely. Across former Alpha space, smaller powers rushed to fill the vacuum. Old rivalries reignited. Border skirmishes flared. Pirate factions emerged almost overnight, armed with salvaged Alpha technology. For a brief moment, it seemed the galaxy might collapse into chaos worse than Alpha rule. Humanity did not intervene immediately. They watched. Human intelligence networks tracked every conflict, every rising tyrant, every attempt to recreate Alpha-style domination. But their fleets remained distant, silent observers. This restraint confused allies and critics alike, until the first warning came. A warlord species attempted to seize an Alpha Forge world, enslaving its population within weeks. They broadcast their victory openly, declaring themselves the new rulers of the sector. Humanity responded with a single action. One ship. It arrived without announcement, disabled the warlord's fleet in under 6 minutes, liberated the Forge world, and left a message encoded into every surviving system. "We ended empires, so this wouldn't happen again." The message spread faster than any fleet ever could. Humanity was not ruling the galaxy. They were enforcing a boundary. Freedom did not mean chaos. Power did not grant ownership. And domination, no matter who attempted it, would not be tolerated. That understanding reshaped galactic politics overnight. New alliances formed, not around fear, but around mutual defense. Former Alpha client species began cooperating for the first time in recorded history. Trade flourished in regions once starved by imperial control. Cultures long suppressed rediscovered identities thought lost forever. And everywhere, humanity remained present, but distant. On Earth, celebrations were brief. Human leaders understood what others did not yet grasp. Victory carried weight. Ending an empire meant inheriting responsibility, whether one wanted it or not. Veterans returned home, carrying memories no parade could erase. Families mourned losses the galaxy would never fully understand. Humanity had won the war. But peace was harder. Within human command circles, debates raged. Some argued humanity should take a more direct role, establish order, prevent future conflicts, guide the galaxy away from repeating Alpha mistakes. Others warned that doing so would make humanity exactly what they had destroyed. History weighed heavily on those decisions. Humans' new empires rarely began with cruelty. They began with good intentions and absolute certainty. That certainty was dangerous. So humanity chose a path no galactic power had ever attempted before. They became guardians without ownership. Human fleets patrolled key transit lanes, but never claimed territory. Human technology was shared selectively, with safeguards to prevent misuse. Aid was offered freely, but never enforced. And when disputes arose, humanity mediated only when invited. They refused worship. They refused titles. They refused to be symbols. That refusal frustrated many, but it worked. Over time, the galaxy stabilized into something unfamiliar but promising. Not a single order imposed from above, but a network of cooperating powers bound by shared memory of what unchecked dominance looked like. The Alpha Imperium faded into history faster than anyone expected. Its name became a warning spoken in classrooms and councils. Its ruins became memorials instead of monuments. The Supreme Alpha, stripped of authority and myth, vanished from public consciousness entirely. Some said it was imprisoned. Others claimed it was exiled. Humanity never confirmed either. They didn't need to. The lesson had already been learned. Across the stars, a quiet understanding settled in. Humanity was not the strongest species in the galaxy. There was something far more unsettling. They remembered. They adapted. And when pushed far enough, they ended things completely. Not to rule, but to make sure no one else ever could. Even after the Supreme Alpha and the Central Command were gone, fragments of the Alpha Imperium lingered in the shadows of the galaxy. Small fleets, isolated colonies, and loyalist enclaves refused to surrender. They did not know whether humanity would hunt them or leave them be, and that uncertainty was as terrifying as the war itself. Many of these survivors hid on fringe systems, on uncharted planets, or inside artificial asteroid fortresses built centuries ago. Their existence was a testament to the stubbornness bred into their species, to endure even when the galaxy itself had turned against them. Across these worlds, the story of human intervention spread like wildfire. From the smallest settlements to massive orbital stations, tales of humans defeating fleets of gods, neutralizing entire planetary defense networks, and reshaping entire star systems became legend. The survivors whispered their stories carefully, knowing that exaggeration could draw attention. But every report carried the same grim truth. Humanity was no ordinary species. Humanity was something the galaxy had never encountered before. The Alpha survivors began to adapt. They experimented, changed tactics, and reconsidered the doctrines that had failed them so catastrophically. Their traditional methods of centralized command were abandoned in favor of decentralized, unpredictable operations. Where once they had relied on fear, now they cultivated stealth, deception, and speed. The few remaining Alpha fleets no longer moved as massive formations meant to intimidate. They became hunters in the void, cautious, calculating, and constantly aware that one misstep could bring them face to face with human precision. But no matter how far they adapted, the memory of humanity's war remained imprinted into every Alpha mind. Survivors spoke of tactics they could not counter, technologies that defied comprehension, and the relentless psychological impact of facing an enemy that had anticipated every move. Entire Alpha academies were rewritten with one central lesson. Humans could not be underestimated. They were not invincible, but they were relentless, intelligent, and unforgiving. And above all, they remembered. The galaxy itself began to shift under humanity's indirect influence. Without the Alphas enforcing obedience, species that had been subjugated for millennia discovered freedom. But freedom without guidance was chaotic. Civilizations that had relied on Alpha protection suddenly had to govern themselves, defend themselves, and negotiate with neighbors who had once been enemies. Old rivalries flared. Minor conflicts escalated. Trade networks that had relied on Alpha enforcement collapsed and had to be rebuilt from scratch. And everywhere, the myth of humans loomed large. Humans were now the standard against which power and survival were measured. In some regions, human presence was visible only through the occasional patrol or fleet in orbit, ensuring that no emerging tyrant could rise unchecked. In others, humans remained completely absent, relying on the reputational weight of their actions to maintain order. Across the stars, every intelligent species knew one thing. The humans had the ability to end wars, crush empires, and erase threats entirely, but they chose not to. That restraint, combined with their overwhelming capability, made humans figures of awe, fear, and reverence. Alpha survivors became obsessed with humans. They studied every recorded encounter, every intercepted transmission, every recovered human ship. They analyzed the methods humans had used to destroy the Imperium without annihilating systems unnecessarily, the ways they had preserved life while dismantling power structures, and the psychological techniques employed to subdue an empire that had never feared defeat. These studies were conducted obsessively, not for vengeance alone, but to understand the species that had forever changed the course of galactic history. Legends of humanity began to spread beyond Alpha survivors. In council halls of former client species, in marketplaces orbiting distant stars, in hidden rebel camps and peaceful colonies alike, humans were discussed with a mixture of awe and dread. Children learned of the humans' victories as morality tales. Scholars debated their strategy and psychology. Military academies use humans as examples of both ultimate threat and ultimate restraint. The story of humanity became a cautionary tale, a parable, and a standard all at once. Yet despite this growing mythos, humans themselves remained understated. They never capitalized on fear. They never demanded worship. They did not establish colonies in conquered alpha space for prestige. Instead, they focused on observation, guidance when invited, and ensuring that no other species could recreate the horrors the alphas had imposed. Humanity had proven that power could exist without oppression, that strength could be exercised responsibly, and that a species could dominate without ruling tyrannically. For the alpha survivors, this was infuriating and humbling. They had trained, engineered, and strategized for centuries, believing themselves invincible, only to be outthought, outmaneuvered, and ultimately restrained by humans who were younger, smaller, and physically weaker. This imbalance between expectation and reality fueled an obsession that lasted generations. Each surviving alpha leader studied humans not only to prevent being destroyed again, but also to understand the philosophy behind their restraint, a concept almost alien to alpha culture. Humanity's influence extended further than mere military might. Cultural and technological exchanges, carefully controlled, reshaped certain sectors. Knowledge, when shared, was tempered with safeguards. Weapons were only provided to species who demonstrated responsibility. Infrastructure reconstruction was guided subtly, ensuring that systems could thrive independently without creating new empires. Human intervention, when it came, was surgical, intentional, and rarely visible, yet always transformative. The galaxy began to see humans not merely as warriors or conquerors, but as an enduring force, a species that could destroy gods and leave civilizations intact. Every system that had once trembled before the alphas now whispered the name of humans with the same reverence and fear that had once belonged to the Imperium. Where once the alphas had inspired loyalty through terror, humans inspired compliance through reputation and inevitability. The story of humanity's victory became a lens through which the galaxy re-evaluated power, strategy, and morality. Even as centuries passed, the legend grew. Alpha survivors and former subjects alike spoke of the humans who had ended the Imperium with precision and patience, who had chosen mercy when they could have annihilated everything. Stories evolved, gaining the grandeur of myth. Humans were said to move faster than light, to anticipate threats before they existed, to think in ways no other species could comprehend. Some accounts were factual, others were embellishments, but all served a single purpose: to remind the galaxy that humans were no ordinary species. And in this quiet post-war age, humanity became the measure against which all others judged themselves. Military doctrines, political strategies, and even cultural philosophies were shaped in response to the humans. Empires that would have risen unchecked were tempered by the memory of what a single species, underestimated and underestimated again, could achieve. Humanity did not rule. They did not conquer. They became something far more enduring, a myth that influenced behavior, shaped strategy, and commanded respect without ever raising a banner or demanding allegiance. From the shadows of lost empires, in the whispers of scholars and the teachings of schools, and in the cautious planning of ambitious warlords, one truth was repeated across the galaxy. The humans had arrived. They had remembered. They had adapted. And when necessary, they had ended empires. No species would ever forget it. No empire would ever rise unchallenged without considering humanity's silent shadow. In every star system once dominated by fear, humans became a standard not only of strength, but of wisdom, restraint, and inevitability. Even alpha survivors, hidden on distant worlds and whispering warnings to each other, carried that lesson in every breath, knowing that should they ever rise again, they would face the same calculating, unyielding, and unforgettable force. The galaxy had changed forever, and humanity, quietly, without desire for adulation or power, had become legend.